Story 1. A big burly former Marine and mercenary from Iraq was back stateside, a huge mountain of a man. We came to face each other in one of the narrow corridors of the office where one of us was going to have to turn sideways. Neither of us turned, but we stopped. I'm 6'1", 260 pounds, and he still towered over me. He was a nice guy but still a little conditioned, I guess you could say, or mentally unhinged. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You feeling froggy?" Truly was like something out of a movie. Without blinking, I replied, "You better jump." We both cracked up and turned sideways, while the office breathed a collective sigh of relief. Story 2. I am a 4th grade teacher, and one day I was up at the board struggling to remember how to spell a particular word. I was trying to make light of it, telling the kids that sometimes adults need help with spelling too. One student replied, "It is because you were poorly educated. But don't worry, we are poorly educated too." Double whammy. Story 3. At work, project management undercut and mismanaged a project so badly. They pushed to get the minimum viable product out with the goal to roll out improvements later. The product was released, they all congratulated themselves and moved on. Then that minimum viable product broke. In a meeting we had with our directors about how it's so broken and the cost to fix it, I asked, how come we couldn't afford to do it right, but we can afford to do it twice? Story 4. I will never forget the moment a family walked into the local pub where I was working. This big, king of the grill, bald patriarch dad type and his wife and kids came through. I said, "Welcome. Where would you like to sit?" He snapped back, "Well, a table would be nice." Without missing a beat, I replied, "Actually, we usually sit on the chairs here." I will never forget the satisfaction of that moment or the look on his face. Haha. Story 5. My uncles were complaining about my dad, so I walked into the conversation and told them it wasn't polite to talk about people behind their backs. My uncle turned to me and said I shouldn't interrupt when the men are speaking, and completely out of character, I replied, "I don't see any men in here." I sure faced some criticism that day, but that's how I knew I won that exchange. Story 6. I worked in cell phone sales for a few years, and a woman came in with a fairly new flip phone. This was 2018, and we still sold them. She was complaining because one of the sides of the screen was dangling off and said she didn't do anything. It just snapped and demanded a new phone. I told her that it looked like physical damage and we didn't have any coverage for it since she didn't buy a phone protection warranty. She insisted it wasn't physical damage, and the phone just broke by itself. She started freaking out, calling me all kinds of names and swinging her phone in my face. Then the top half of the phone literally snapped off and landed on the counter in front of me. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "Well, that was definitely physical damage." She lost her composure at my comment, and it was weirdly satisfying. Story 7. Working retail, a customer once told me she hoped I die. I was so into work mode that I blankly responded, "I mean, we all die. That's not much of a threat." Maybe it was my lack of intimidation or blank stare, but that really shut her up. Story 8. I didn't realize the nature of my comment when I wrote it, but in high school, one of my teachers did end-of-the-year anonymous evaluations. Everyone hated him, and I understood why, but I still did well in his class. I wrote, "I don't have any critiques about your teaching, but I think you should work on being a better person." Story 9. Forensic biology professor brings out a fresh human brain as a surprise to a stunned class. "You have no idea what I had to go through to get this. The skull." Story 10. When I was 12, my older sister had a boy over for Thanksgiving dinner. She dated lots of unpleasant people, but this guy was the worst. Big, brash, annoying person who was rude to her and basically everyone. As we sat down for dinner, before we were about to say what we were thankful for, he said, "Looks like I'm seated at the head of the table. Must be important," with a huge grin. Without pausing, I gestured to my dad seated opposite him and said, "Actually, my dad is at the head of the table. You're the rude one." My mom scolded me for swearing at the table, but years later told me she and my dad thought it was hilarious. Story 11. After 4 years in an abusive relationship and 1 year of an abusive marriage, I told my ex that I wanted a divorce. He told me that I couldn't divorce him or I'd go to hell. My response was, well, I guess I'll see you there. I then kicked him out of my house, for which he had never paid a dime in bills, and told him to call his mom for a plane ticket. Not the most remarkable story here, but it felt good. Story 12. I was around 17 or 18 and getting my first filling at the dentist. They gave me nitrous oxide for pain and to help me relax during the procedure. The dentist came back and asked me, "How are you feeling?" All I said was, "I don't." And he lost it and laughed for what seemed like 20 minutes before he could pull himself together. I also started laughing because of the laughing gas, and his laugh was infectious. So we were both just sitting in the room laughing, and all his assistants came by and were very confused. Story 13. Not me, my daughter. This boy at school called her retarded. Her response? No, I'm autistic. I don't know what your excuse is. She was in 6th grade. I was pretty shocked when I got that phone call. She usually doesn't say things to people. Story 14. I worked at Target back in college in a stocking job where we had to be there at around 4 or 5 a.m. to unload trucks. One morning, I overslept a bit and walked to the unpacking line about 10 minutes late, eating a breakfast bar. The boss stormed over and started loudly berating me in front of everyone for being late. As he was going on, I was listening and taking bites of the bar without much expression, mainly because I was so tired. It finally bothered him that I was chewing during the yelling, and he stopped mid-sentence, held out his hand and said, "Give me that thing." It just happened that I only had one bite left, so I took it, handed him the wrapper, and said thanks with a mouth full of food. He paused and started laughing at the ridiculous response to his complaining. We were buddies after that. Story 15. Young male traveling with a group of other males. Border Patrol stopped us as we were being searched for drug smuggling. Border Patrol agent, you know I have the authority to conduct a cavity search? Me somehow without skipping a beat. Sure, you might, but neither of us would enjoy it, and you wouldn't find anything. Off the hook. No fingers in my butt. Story 16. A couple of months ago, my now ex-friend was telling me all the things that were wrong with me, and she finished it with, "And at least I don't have to wear makeup to look pretty." I was so fed up with her attitude, so I responded, "At least I am capable of looking pretty." She was speechless, and I felt like such a badass because this was the first time I ever stood up to her. Story 17. I'm a writer and I do a bit of stand-up comedy. As such, people tend to introduce me to new people as a comedian, writer, etc. So I was outside a bar smoking with a friend of a friend when he introduced me to one of his friends. His friend was dressed like Liam Gallagher from Oasis and seemed to exude a bit of a cocky, sneering manner. The introduction went as follows. Friend of friend. Mr. Gallagher, this is Righter of Wrongs. He's a comedian. Mr. Gallagher. Looks me up and down. Comedian, eh? Does that mean you think you're funny? Righter of Wrongs. No, it means everyone else does. I literally do not know where it came from. I didn't think about the response, it just came out. And it is hands down the greatest thing I've ever said. Story 18. At work at a company meeting, someone was presenting something cool they volunteered to work on and finished. They then explained things they thought they could do better in a self-deprecating way, and a bunch of other people started criticizing his work with petty comments. It was definitely good work, though, and a thought just hit me, so I blurted it out. Sometimes done is the best feature. A bunch of people laughed, and then the criticism stopped. People gave him credit, and we moved on. Not really remarkable, but I was surprised this thought somehow came out fully formed, like it was some phrase I've been saying for decades. I guess I was just realizing how many people don't finish anything they start. So, done suddenly seemed like a pretty good feature. Give the man some credit for finishing the thing. Story 19. Back in high school, I was a slow, overweight kid. For physical education, we would jog about 1 kilometer to the beach, have a swimming lesson, then jog back. I was the last one back to the school grounds, and the teacher was standing at the gate. He told me that because I was too slow, he was going to lock the gate, and I have to jog to the next one 200 meters away. I said that I'd consider him locking me out of school grounds to be a suspension and just go home. He let me in straight away, Kind of wished he'd tried calling my bluff so I could have followed through and just gone home. Story 20. I was in an acting class in college, and we were doing a scene where a couple was having a big drawn-out fight. Multiple pairs went through the scene, and I studied it pretty hard, so I knew all the lines. We're about halfway through our performance when my partner clearly forgets what her line is. And because everyone was doing that scene, they could tell she had forgotten as well. Her next line was supposed to be, "Well, I'm sorry I asked. I'm not usually a quick thinker on my feet, but I just filled the second or two of awkward silence with, 'I bet you're sorry you asked, huh?' and continued on with my lines. Not overly impressive per se, but the class and professor loved it and all laughed. Probably the only quick-witted thing I've ever done in my life. Story 21. I already posted here, but I just thought of another story. There was this one extremely attractive girl in my Communication 101 class in college. One day, for a project where we interviewed other students, I was partnered with her. We ended up not finishing our questions in class, so I asked her if I could meet her somewhere to finish interviewing her. She said yes. Fast forward to the next day, I meet her after her dance group finishes rehearsal. I knock through the last few questions, and the final one which I ask is, "What do you perceive the future to hold?" She replies, "I don't even know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I have no idea what the future holds." So I say, "Well, if you don't know what you're having for dinner, do you want to have dinner with me?" She laughed, said yes, and though we only hooked up that night, I still look back on that day as one of the best dating stories I've had yet. Story 22. I worked at a bookstore, and a customer asked me, "How often do the periodicals come out?" I deadpanned, "Periodically." He asked to speak to my manager. Worth it. Story 23. Kind of a proud moment for me. I was always really shy in school, had very few friends, and was bullied a lot. My mom passed away when I was 14, and I kept it to myself, not wanting sympathy or more bullying for it. Someone found out, not sure how. They then said in one of our mutual classes that I should just die like my stupid mom did. The whole class heard and was shocked. Even the teacher was like a deer in headlights. I immediately got up to leave, but before I left, I turned to her, got up close and said, "I've seen what cancer does to people. It hurts. And I would never wish that on anyone. Not even you." Then I turned and walked out. A lot of people gave me some respect for the fact that I stood up for myself, although people then knew my mom had died, which wasn't great. I ended up leaving the school a few months later anyway, but I was glad that I stood up for myself. Story 24. Me and my girlfriend at the time were having a discussion about her going back to school. She kept putting it off every semester, and one day she got angry at me for trying to get her to actually go back, not just talk about it, and she yelled, "Rome wasn't built in a day." I responded, "Yeah, but it was built." A decade later, I still think of that. Edit. She did end up going back to school. Got her master's even. She's married now with twins. Just a real annoyance. Story 25. At a party a few years back, someone stole my friend's purse. Her boyfriend found the guys who took it and got it back for her, but he was still in an angry, drunken rage and was continuing to escalate the situation when he was well outnumbered. My friend finds me and says, "I'm afraid my boyfriend is about to get into a fight. I need your help. Stop him, please." I stand up and tell her, "I can't promise you I can stop him from fighting, but I can promise you I won't let him lose," before walking off to find him. Ultimately, no fight actually broke out, and I didn't realize that I had basically said a cheesy one-liner until after the fact when my friend told me how intense that line was. I didn't mean for it to sound so dramatic. I just wanted to let her know I wouldn't let him get hurt. I didn't mean to make it sound like I was about to demolish 3 guys by myself like I'm some sort of action hero. Story 26. Years ago, I worked at a Hard Rock cafe, and we often had pre-shift server meetings outdoors on a patio, while my boss was droning on about us selling more overpriced plastic cups. I was staring off at the spinning globe on top of the building that says, "Save the Planet" on it. I interrupted my boss by blurting out, "If Hard Rock is trying to save the planet, why do we waste so much paper?" This comment was really directed at my managers, who had a fixation on printing out unnecessary memos. They somehow didn't realize it was about them specifically and passed the comment up the food chain, which ended up resulting in the entire company changing their payroll system to paperless globally. As a reward, I was given a pin shaped like a light bulb that said "Bright Idea" on it. Thanks, I guess. Story 27. Go wait with mommy. Daddy might be going back to jail again. A guy pushed my 5-year-old daughter at the fish store, and she started crying. When he heard me say that, he ran out of the store. I've never been to jail before. Story 28. We had an overly dramatic neighbor who always claimed she was sick and dying. My mom came to see my kids in the middle of battling stage 4 lung cancer. The neighbor pulled her aside and said, "Hi Rita. So glad to see you. Did Jason tell you that I am dying?" My mom looked right at her, smiled and said, "Me too, dear, but not today." Never more proud of her. Story 29. This one had a little setup, but I think it's funny enough to share. At a family vacation, my grandmother was giving me grief for not remembering her birthday. I've never been good with birthdays. After telling me it was the password to her iPhone, she wanted me to take a picture with it, which is why I needed the password. While she was distracted, I opened up the settings, changed her password to my birth date, and then set her phone down. 15 minutes later, she's trying to get into her phone and it's not working. Suspecting mischief, she grumpily asks me if I've changed the password to her phone in front of our entire family. I admit that I did. "Well, what is it?" she asked impatiently. "It's my birth date." She sat there in stunned silence for about 15 seconds, not being able to remember my birthday before our family exploded laughing. It was a good time,